I carried dockets for the Thren Assize for 6 years, before anyone bothered to tell me why the Hall of Closing Ledgers kept no clocks. The Thren didn't need them. They read the night by scent, the way the station's recycled air turned mineral and flat once the outer hull had shed the last of the day's warmth. When the air turned, the wax turned with it. That was midnight to them, not a number on a dial. The exact breath when judicial binding wax stopped remembering it had ever been soft. I was the runner. Human legs, human patience, no mandibles to keep dry, and no scent glands to confuse with the station's ductwork. That was the whole of my use to them, and I never resented it. Every case the Assize heard in a day closed at that breath. A docket sealed before the wax set was law, unbreakable, on record forever. A docket still open after was struck from the ledger entirely, the case treated as if it had never been argued, the accused walking free of it, unowed, unowned, unremembered. It sounds like mercy. It isn't, not really. It just means the Thren built their whole appeals process backward from an accident of chemistry, and they'd grown careless about which cases they let run long, trusting the wax to clean up whatever they didn't finish in time. Most nights that carelessness cost nobody anything. Most nights the wax sealed exactly what the adjudicator meant to write, and I ran the docket down, and the case closed clean, and I went home to my bunk with nothing on my mind heavier than the ache in my knees from the stairs. I liked the work, if I'm honest. There's a kind of peace in being useful in a small, exact way. Carry this, on time, correctly, and a life goes on undisturbed somewhere you'll never see. I'd done it thousands of times by then. I could have done it in my sleep, and some nights I nearly did. That night, it nearly cost a child 11 years of her life. Her name was Azette, thin-jointed and pale-shelled the way Thren younglings are before their first molt, and she'd been brought up on a debt her father owed and died owing. Under Assize law, a debt doesn't die with the debtor. It migrates to the nearest bloodkin with a working set of hands, and Isette had both of those, technically, if you didn't look too closely at how small they were, or at the way she'd stood through the whole hearing, with her forelimbs tucked so tight against her carapace, she looked like she was trying to fold herself out of the room entirely. I'd stood at the back of that chamber with a stack of other dockets under my arm, and watched her the way I watch every case I don't have a stake in, which is to say more closely than I let on. The adjudicator hearing her case, an old, unhurried Thren named Corvain, who I'd run dockets for since my first month on the station, had meant to rule her a minor, exempt, the debt held in abeyance until she came of age. He'd said as much out loud in the chamber, slow and plain, the way he said everything, and I'd seen something in Isette's stance ease half a degree at the sound of it. I heard him say it. I was standing close enough to see her believe him. What he actually wrote, in the rush of a night with 19 other cases stacked behind hers, was the wrong clause. A single glyph, one stroke different from the one he meant. It turned exempt, pending majority, into indentured, full term. I found it because I was the one who carried the docket down to the sealing table, and I have carried enough of Corvain's rulings to know his handwriting the way you know a person's walk from behind. Something in the shape of that glyph was wrong before I understood why. I had 11 minutes. The chamber clerk confirmed it without looking up, more irritated by the interruption than concerned by what was in it. Dockets got corrected on the sealing table all the time. Technically, a clerk's amendment stroke was legal, right up until the moment the wax set, and Corvain himself was 2 levels up in a hearing he couldn't leave. 11 minutes was enough to fetch him. It was not enough to fetch him and get his signature back down to the sealing table before the air turned. So I didn't fetch him. I took the docket, and I took the wax. Thren binding wax comes off the block warm and workable, a Thren attendant tending a small brazier at the sealing table to keep it soft until the exact breath of midnight arrives and does the rest of the work for free. I'd watched 100 dockets close that way. I had never once needed to know how long the wax stayed soft once it left the brazier, because I had never once needed it to stay soft a second longer than it wanted to. I asked the attendant. She looked at me the way the Thren look at humans when we ask a question with an answer too obvious to be worth having. Skin heat. Any skin heat kept against it would hold the wax past the turn, for as long as the heat lasted. She said it like I'd asked her whether water was wet. I took the seal blot off the table with my bare hand before she'd finished the sentence. It burned less than I expected, and more than I wanted. I ran with it, cupped against my palm, the way you'd carry an ember you weren't ready to let go out. 2 levels up a service stair the Thren don't use, because their leg joints don't bend that way. The stair was cold the way everything on that station got cold once the hull gave up the day's heat, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that I was racing the same turn of temperature twice, once in my hand and once in the air around me, and I only had to win one of the 2 races to matter. My palm had gone from a sting to something duller and worse by the second landing. I didn't look at it. Looking at it would have meant slowing down, and slowing down would have meant handing 11 years back to a clerical accident nobody but me had noticed. I came through the hearing room door without knocking, Corvain's low, unhurried voice still going as I crossed the threshold. I have never once interrupted him in 9 years, and he stopped mid-sentence at the sight of me holding a corrected docket in one hand and a fist of live wax in the other, and for a breath his mandibles did something I'd never seen them do, which I've come to understand, since, was the Thren version of alarm. He didn't ask why. He read the glyph. He saw his own mistake before I had to describe it, made the correction stroke in 3 seconds flat with a stylus that lived on a cord around his throat for exactly this. Dockets got amended at the sealing table. That part was never in question. The only question was whether there'd be any wax left soft enough to take the amendment. There was. Barely. My palm was blistering by the time he pressed the corrected docket flat against the blot and the wax. My wax, kept alive past its hour by nothing but the stupid animal fact of a human running a fever of effort, took the new seal instead of the old one. A breath later, the air went flat and mineral around us, the way it did every night, the way it had for longer than either of our species had a station out here to breathe it on. The wax finished hardening on its own. It didn't know or care that it had been cheated of 9 of its usual minutes. It only knew it was cold now, and so it set, and once it set, it was law. Iset went home exempt. She'll come of age owing nothing that isn't hers. Nobody thanked me for it, which is correct. I'm not owed thanks for reading a friend's handwriting and being too stubborn to let a clerical accident outrun me down a stairwell. Corvain didn't mention it again, not once, though he did start locking eyes with me for half a second longer than he used to, whenever I brought him a docket near the end of a long night, which is as close as a Thren comes to gratitude, and closer than most of them ever get. I still have the scar, small, off-white, shaped like nothing in particular, in the exact center of my right palm. The Thren attendant who told me a human hand ran warm enough to cheat a law built on physics has never once let me forget that she was the one who told me. And to this day, whenever a docket runs long on the sealing table, she looks at my hand before she looks at the clock nobody keeps. I don't tell this story for the ending. Any fool can carry a hot coal 11 minutes if the stakes are a child's decade. I tell it because of the 10 seconds before that, standing at the sealing table, listening to an attendant explain, patiently, like it was the most obvious fact in the world, that skin heat would do the job, and understanding, in that one flat sentence, that the only thing standing between a mistake and a life was whether anyone in the room was willing to get burned on purpose before the night finished turning cold.